It is December 6th, and we're
Yes.
sitting here with Mrs. Ofelia Viola, and she is consented to let us interview her about her experiences during World War II. The first question I'd like to start with who were the members of your family at the outbreak of war?
Well, we were 8 children. There were 5 girls and 3 boys. And of course, my parents were around. And when we found out about the war, it was at the Jesuit church in Intramuros, when the priest came out in his sermon that the war had been declared. That was a Sunday morning as far as we were concerned. It was December 8. It happened, I suppose, in your country, December 7. But it was a few hours later when we heard about it, that it was already December 8 at the time. So my first reaction, of course, then, was my father said, well, we have to go to school because you're going to get all your books. And we were quite delighted about the whole idea of not going to school. And my mother was saying, you know, we have to start getting a little food because if there's a war, things might be a little difficult for us to get any more, since there were a lot of people who were also just as frantic as we were. So my mother had to go and we had to get some rice. That was the most important thing, the most important staple. And my father was in a very, he suffered high blood pressure at the time. And we knew that he was quite tense about the whole thing. But he never let us know about it. So we just took things lightly.
When war broke out, what was your age?
I was 14 years old, and we were quite, since school had to stop, and it was almost like Christmas at the time, my father said, all right, I think we have to evacuate you and go to to my province, my father's province, which is not too far away in Malabon. So we stayed there for until about New Year's Day, because we knew that Manila was declared an open city. And the Japanese were going to come in, but they said they were not going to touch anybody. So after New Year's Day, we came back to our home. And we just stayed home and did nothing and waited until the Japanese proclaimed whatever they wanted us to do. And the first thing they said was, you should surrender all your radios. And my father said, okay, we will do that. And they also, much later, they were trying to get our house for them to live in. But my father says, until you find a place for us, we're not going to get out of here. They took our cars. My father, what he did was he tried to remove the engine and stuff like that, but they still got it. They still got our 2 cars. So life was not as bad in the beginning because there was still a lot of food, but you could still get enough to eat. But after 2 or 3 years, it became really bad. Like we had to mix our rice with corn so that we could, make it a little more than what we would have, mm-hmm. because the corn sort of makes it much more. Makes it, what do you call it?
More filling?
More filling, yes, more
mm-hmm.
filling to the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And we also thrived on talinum, mm-hmm. which was a very good vegetable, which I've been looking for since a few months back. And somehow my maids were able to get some talinum planted in my yard. So now I get the talinum that I've always wanted to eat. So that was it. 3 years. We didn't actually do much, except that my father said, I don't want you to be staying home. You better go to school and take some courses. So I took up steno, and I took up typing, and I took up a few other things that was practical, like taking care of babies and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And where was the school that you attended? And were you made to speak Japanese? Were you being taught Japanese at this school?
Well, this was like this first year or the second year, the school opened. And we went back to take our third year high school. Yes, we had a Japanese teacher. We had to take up Japanese language and katakana. We had to learn how to read katakana and write katakana. We even had radio taisho, which is like a Japanese sports exercises. We had to do that every single day. We could not, all our algebra books, all the dollar signs had to be changed into peso signs. Like we had to type peso signs and then place those little peso on each dollar sign. They were that paranoid. We finished high school in 1944, and we didn't have any, we just had a commencement, but no parties, no nothing. We just had, we had to get our mother's rings or some jewelry to make our class rings, because there was nothing, we really didn't have that much. We, after that war, after that graduation, my father told me to go to UP for college. So I went to the UP, which was not too far away from my home. And about September, around the earlier part of September, my father said, "You better stop because I think something's going to happen." September 21 was the first time that the Americans flew over Manila and started to bomb Manila. This was in 1944. We didn't know what was going on, except that friends would tell us that they think that the Americans have already landed in Leyte. Some people still hid their radios and were able to get information from, what do you call this, shortwave, okay? And they would tell us what was happening, because we didn't know actually what was happening. So finally, September 21, we knew that this was not just a mock raid, because my brother and I were outside and we saw those Japanese looking up, and so we said, "Oh, this must be the raid they were talking about, a mock raid." And all of a sudden we saw those bullets shooting out, and we ran for our dear lives because all the branches from the trees were falling down, and my brother was able to get a bullet this big, from our air raid shelter in the garden. So we knew, we were quite delighted about the whole thing, even though we knew that people were getting hurt somewhere else. But we were quite delighted about it because we knew that the Americans were coming. So that prepared us, that was the end of my school. And since that time, we had air raids every Sunday, practically every Sunday. And sometimes there would be a Navy truck that would park right in front of our house, because we had a little street running in front of our house, which was completely covered with acacia trees. They would hide there. They would hide under the trees. They would have about 2 or 3 trucks, and we were just watching from the window upstairs, just exactly what they were doing. And my sister said, "You know, I think they're really having a hard time because they're eating little pieces of rice." We didn't know at that time that there was such a thing as sushi, you know? And we were quite sorry for them in a way, because they had just little bits of rice. But of course, later on we realized that they were having a good time and having their own food. Anyway, February was the real bad time when they started, February 3 was the exact date. My father received a phone call saying that the Americans were already in Santo Tomas, which is north of Manila, okay? And we were in South because we were living in Malate. And so I remember my father said, "Are they the white leghorns?" And the voice on the other one said, "Yes, they're white leghorns." So we said, "Okay,
Now, what do you mean
get
white leghorns?
Oh no, it's not. It's white eggs. Eghorns. They call it white eghorns. I don't know why.
Oh no. Huh.
And so my father said, "Okay, get yourselves ready, because we are going to transfer in an apartment which is very close to us." It had 4 stories. If there was going to be street fighting, we would be on the 4th floor. So we got whatever we could get, and we transferred to the apartment building on the 4th floor. In the meantime, we were already getting shelling from the American side. And right in front of our house, it had 2 gates. The Japanese would enter our garden and put sandbags on the other gate. It was like, you know, like they were just for a sentry was always there in that other side. And previous to February 3, they dynamited the street where we were on, the street right in front of our house, and they dumped 2 taxis in there. It was a big hole. They had big holes. They dumped 2 taxis in there, and they put landmines. So every time we would walk to go to church, we would see all these twigs and leaves. We would jump over the landmines to go to church. Oh yes, we knew that the landmines were there. So, and we would just jump over it. Okay, so that was our life then. But February 3, when we started to move out from the house, every night there was bombing, there was shelling, every single night. And my brother's room upstairs, we had no more roof because it had been shelled. His room was completely devastated. In the meantime, all the neighbors were coming into the apartment because they were burning our street. The street comprised about, from Malate Church to Plaza Militar, it was about, I would say about 20 houses. They were all coming into the apartment because we thought that the apartment was made of concrete and therefore it would be a safer place than being in a house with just one floor house. So people were brought in. We made the 1st floor into a hospital, like a clinic for the people who were hurt. But there was one night when they hit all the landmines and everything, the whole thing was pandemonium. We couldn't even see anything that was happening. And about a week afterwards, they were saying, "I think we have to get out from here," because they were going to burn our houses. Even the apartment building we were staying in was going to be burned.
The Japanese were
going to burn it. So we decided, all right, let's move out. Now we bore holes into the walls so we could move from one house to the next until we got to dead end. That was the last house. We didn't know what to do. So somebody mentioned, why don't we go and go to the burned buildings, the burned houses, and transfer to Mabini, which is just on the other side of where we were. So we moved there. We found this property, burned and all, with 4 intact walls. There were about 60 of us. We went there, and it was about 5 in the evening, and we decided that's the safest place we could be in, because they were already burned out anyway. There were lots of stuff there, like pots and pans and even silverware, and anything you could see on the floor was for you to use. Like my friend and I had a can of Milo, and she said, tonight we'll have a spoonful of Milo. And that night we had a spoonful of Milo. The night was very long, but it was one of the most beautiful nights I've ever seen, because the whole of Manila was burning and there were embers flying all around like fireflies. You could actually read the book because it was all, the sky was all lit up. Huh? And we hardly sleep. The following morning, we were very thirsty, my friend and I, and we said, okay, let's go and look for the well, because we knew there was a well there somewhere. When we got out of our little four walls, we found out that there were other people there, friends of ours that we didn't even know were there. So we moved in and they said, so yeah, there's a well over there, but I don't know whether you like the idea of drinking from it. When we looked at the well, there were 2 dead people inside. So we said, no, never mind, forget our thirst. So we went back to where we were, and there were some people who saw an airplane. It was like a reconnaissance plane, and they started waving at the Americans, who thought we were Japanese, because 20 minutes later, we were being shelled, and the shelling was like carpet shelling. And when I say carpet shelling, it's precise shelling. They went from row to row until it finally hit us where we were, and you couldn't see beyond your noses because the smoke was so thick with, yeah, I suppose dust and gunpowder smoke. We were crying, we were hugging one another, and then finally when the smoke disappeared, we saw a few people who had been hurt. And my father said, why don't you try and help? Try and do something to these people. So I went there, I saw this young boy. He had about, I'd say about less than 100 shrapnels all over him. And we started picking like the shrapnels from his arm, like they were embedded popcorn, you know. Then we had iodine, we would pour the iodine right on his arm, and he didn't even flinch because he was in a state of shock. I imagine he must have been in a state of shock. All he said was, I want a rosary, I want a rosary. So we had all tried to get our rosaries to give to him. And after that, about an hour later, 2 Japanese came inside our 4 walls looking for watches. Watches. And my brother-in-law had a watch with him. He decided to remove it and hid it inside his shoe. Anyway, the Japanese said, we are coming back at 5 o'clock. This was early in the morning, by this time it was about 9 o'clock. We're coming back at 5 o'clock because we know that some Japanese had been killed somewhere around this area. So the elders of the families decided to get together and said, what are we going to do? So they decided we have to get out of there. So we decided to get out. At 5 o'clock, we started walking single file, 60 of us. When we came out on the streets, everything was devastated. We couldn't tell one street from another. We didn't even know where we were. That was my neighborhood. I knew it very well, but I couldn't tell where we were. So we just walked and walked and walked. And people would come out from their air raid shelters and they would say, what in the world are you doing out there? Don't you know that there are a lot of snipers? We couldn't do anything but just walk and follow the elders. And there was one apartment building was still standing. They were just hauling the machine gun into the top floor. If they had installed that machine gun before we passed, I wouldn't be here. There were dead people everywhere. We saw some dead people in the trees, and we wondered how did they get there. Then we would jump over a dead person. We didn't feel anything. We were in a state of shock, I suppose. We didn't feel anything. We just walked one behind the other until we reached Taft Avenue. I don't know. That was the demarcation line. We didn't even realize at that time that we were already in the line of, in the war zone, in the right, because on one side were the Americans. We were on the other side with the Japanese and the refugees. My sister crossed to the other side. She started screaming. And I said, oh, they're killing them. They're killing them. And a few of us made a U-turn to get back where we came from. And then I heard her say, she was motioning for us to come. So we crossed with our hands up. And there I saw my first American. Dirty, grimy, like the rest of us were. And he was asking for a doctor. And one of our group was a dentist, and he says, I'm sorry, but I'm a dentist. I don't know anything about your eye, because he was complaining about his eye. But I have some scotch, if you want some scotch. And he says, no, I want somebody to look at my eye. I don't care for scotch. Well, anyway, they told us to move on and go to the marketplace. When we it was about probably a kilometer away, when we got to a bridge, a small bridge. On top of the bridge was a dead Japanese. His insides were burning, okay? And when we were moving, some relatives saw my father and started, going after him and hugging him. While I was watching the Japanese, they were all hugging and kissing. And I was watching this Japanese. I didn't realize that your insides was, the technicolor was full of color. It had a lot of greens and reds, and everything was burning, but I didn't realize that he had a grenade in his belt. Yeah. So after the kissing and the hugging, we went down the bridge, going down, he exploded. So we just lay flat again on the ground. And it's a good thing nothing happened to us because we were probably, God was there with us all the time. So we walked on until we reached this place they call Settlement House. It's a huge edifice. The second floor had no roof, but the ground floor was made into a hospital, a mini hospital. So we were brought upstairs. At least now, we were probably about 800 in that whole place, and this was the first time we were able to sleep on a wooden floor, which was really quite a big thrill for us. That at least we were sleeping, although we could see the sun, the sky, we see the stars and the moon. But it was still a big, and we were quite delighted. We were so happy that we were no longer in the war zone. So that is more or less the story I have, except that when we went back to my relative's house, the one who were hugging and kissing us, and we were taking a bath, the whole place exploded because they had landmines there. A lot of those people in the hospital were dead. It's a good thing we were not inside when that happened, because we were having our first lunch and our first bath in so many days. So that is my story.
Can we stop for just a second?
Mm-hmm. Bayview Hotel, and in the nurses' home in PGH, there was a lot of sexual abuse by the Japanese, yes.
And were you one of the victims?
No, because we were always with a family. We were 60 of us, and we all traveled together.
Okay.
So no, we were not touched, nothing. We didn't even see any Japanese except for those two that we saw that came inside our wall.
Okay.